What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in today. It's November 26th, 2024, and ladies and gentlemen, we are currently experiencing one of the greatest seasons of college football of all time. 2021 was a great year. 2016 had a bunch of crazy games, but this 2024 season is seriously up there with 2007 and a couple others as one of the craziest, most chaotic, and most fun seasons that our sport has ever seen. Week 13 was an absolute blast from start to finish. There were several wild upsets, massive changes in the college football playoff picture. We have teams all over the place in position to win their conference title in the first season of being in that conference. And then even outside the matchups with major CFP and conference title implications, there were just phenomenal games everywhere across the country. Let's get right into a game that I hardly even mentioned in the preview episode last week, that I didn't exactly anticipate bringing up today, but the game that had one of the most shocking and influential results of the entire season. Oklahoma crushed number 7 Alabama 24-3. The 5-5 Oklahoma Sooners crushed the top 10 Alabama Crimson Tide. Imagine telling someone that like 3 weeks ago when the Tide was destroying LSU and Oklahoma could hardly score an offensive point. This game was just unthinkable, and not necessarily from the viewpoint of Oklahoma pulling off the upset. It was like a 10 or 13 point spread, so it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that Oklahoma could win, but just in the manner that they did was shocking. From very early on in the game, it felt like Oklahoma was the team that should have the number 7 next to their name, and it looked like Alabama was the one who had been sluggish on offense for the entire year. The Sooners had not beaten an FBS team since the month of September when they needed a late pick 6 to beat Auburn, and they just took it to Alabama in this game. Alabama scored 3 total points. That is their lowest in a game since 2004. This gave Alabama their third loss of the year. They hadn't had 3 losses in one season since 2010. Alabama failed to score in the last 3 quarters of a game for the first time since 2000. It was the first time they didn't score a touchdown in a game since 2011. It was their largest margin of defeat to an unranked team since the 1998 Music City Bowl, and it gave Alabama its first season with a losing record in road games since 2006. Oklahoma completed 9 passes in this game. 9. They were 9 of 12 passing as a team for a grand total of 68 yards. However, they were in the mindset of run it if you can, and they certainly could. The Sooners had 49 rushing attempts for 260 yards, averaging 5.3 yards per carry. They controlled time of possession, holding the ball for 8 more minutes than Alabama. Their offense was better than we've been accustomed to seeing this year, but still really wasn't great. They had just 17 offensive points, and their defense, of course, was the primary reason for this game looking the way that it did. Oklahoma held Alabama to just 234 total yards. That's their lowest in a game since 2014, and they had the 49-yard pick 6 late in the third quarter to put it away. The win gets Oklahoma bowl eligible. They got to storm the field to get some heat off of head coach Brent Venables, and it was just a massive result for the whole program. And going back to Venables, the last 2 times that he's faced Alabama, he's beaten the Tide by 21-plus points in both games. The last time Alabama met a Venables-coached defense was in that 2018 National Championship game, where Clemson beat Alabama 44-16. So the last 2 times a Venables-coached defense has played Alabama, they beat them 44-16 and 24-3. The loss eliminates Alabama from SEC championship contention. It should eliminate them from college football playoff contention. And now they have to face an Auburn team next week who finally showed some signs of life on Saturday night, and we'll get to their game in a bit. Florida took down number 9 Ole Miss 24-17, and just like Oklahoma, they got one of the biggest wins that their program's had in quite some time, and one that it desperately needed. This one came as less of a surprise. I actually picked Florida straight up in my weekly Friday Instagram post with all the picks, but I was a little bit on the fence in the Week 13 preview episode of the podcast, but ended up picking the Gators on Friday. But they were still 10-point underdogs, and this result sent ripple effects throughout the entire sport. The job that Billy Napier has done there after the way that the season started is truly incredible. People were calling for his job from the very first day of the season. They lost their starting quarterback, Graham Mertz. It looked like they lost DJ Lagway for the year too. Lagway comes back. They've battled through other injuries all over the place. They lost their best DB, Jason Marshall, for the year. And despite all of that, the Gators are going bowling. And fans are always really quick to judge coaches and players and teams, but the overwhelming consensus around this Florida team coming into the season was that they had the hardest strength of schedule in the country. People were calling it one of the toughest strength of schedules ever. And if they went 7-5, that would be a pretty solid season. Even just getting to a bowl game at 6-6 was basically the goal. Well, now it looks like they're going to be 7-5, and nothing's a given like we just saw with Alabama and Oklahoma, but I do believe Florida will beat FSU next week, so they will likely finish 7-5. They're going to a bowl game, and Billy Napier has pretty much met the goal for this season. And obviously 7-5 isn't the record that they want every year in Gainesville, but with the schedule that they played, with the injuries that they've had, he's done a remarkable job to get them to this point. Getting back to the game, DJ Lagway was solid. They really used his arm talent more sparingly than they probably could. He was just 10 of 17, but had 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then their three-headed monster in the backfield was great. Montrell Johnson had 18 carries for 107 yards and a touchdown, and Jaden Ball and Jacoby Jackson had good days as well. Elijah Badger has become Lagway's number one option in the receiving room. He was huge last week against LSU and then had 5 receptions for 87 yards and a touchdown against the Rebels. I made a point to emphasize the defensive lines of each team in the preview episode last week, and Florida actually won that battle. They had 4 sacks, Ole Miss had 3. They had 9 tackles for loss, Ole Miss had 5. And just on defense in general, they had more tackles, more passes deflected, and more turnovers forced. Jackson Dart had thrown 4 interceptions the entire year. Florida picked him off twice, and there were about 3 or 4 passes total that probably could have been interceptions. They were on him in the backfield. The secondary had points where they struggled, but then they also had points where Ole Miss couldn't really do much of anything in the passing game. And from where that defense was week 1 against Miami, the improvement there for Florida has been remarkable. The loss for Ole Miss has eliminated them from the SEC championship race, knocked them out of the college football playoff race, and what was one of the most promising years in Rebel football history now suddenly looks a lot like their other recent seasons. For Florida, they're 6-5. They opened as a 14-point favorite over FSU next week. Like I mentioned before, they'll likely get to 7 wins there, and I actually think it's a pretty high likelihood that they finish with 8 wins, because this team with DJ Lagway at quarterback should easily take care of Florida State, and then due to their record, their bowl game's not going to be one of the most prestigious ones, and they'll probably get an opponent there that they can beat as well. So the majority of this team's stars are also freshmen and sophomores who probably won't be opting out, so they'll also have that advantage. Just a remarkable win and an amazing turnaround for Billy Napier and the Florida program. Continuing the trend of teams with average records taking down CFP contenders, just like Oklahoma and Florida, Auburn earned a massive win as well when they took down number 15 Texas A&M. The Tigers beat the top 15 Aggies 43-41 in quadruple overtime, and this will go down as one of the best games of the entire 2024 season. I believe for just the 3rd time all year, we had a game break the ESPN win probability chart. At one point in the first overtime of this game, the chart that ESPN has for each game in the Gamecast section on the website, it depicted Texas A&M as having a 100% chance to win the game, before the Tigers eventually won 3 overtimes later. This game had absolutely everything. Auburn jumped out to a 21-0 lead, 21-0, and then Texas A&M scored 21 unanswered of their own to tie it up. Auburn retook the lead. Texas A&M scored 10 unanswered to go up 31-28. Auburn's field goal kicking has been atrocious all year. Their kicker nailed a field goal to send the game to overtime. Each team also had big plays. Cam Coleman had a 63-yard touchdown for Auburn. Noah Thomas had a 73-yard touchdown for the Aggies. This game had horrific officiating that almost cost Auburn the game in overtime. It had 4 overtimes, getting to the point where they alternate the 2-point conversion attempts, and it was just phenomenal. These two were about as even as it possibly gets on a Saturday night. Total yardage was 469-464 in favor of Auburn. Auburn had 5 more yards. The only thing that could have made this game better was if the total yardage was a margin of 2 instead of 5, because then that one failed 2-point conversion attempt from 2 yards out would have literally been the only 2 yards separating them in the entire game. As devastating as this loss was for Texas A&M, everything they set out to accomplish this season is still in front of them with the other results from Saturday in the SEC. If the Aggies beat Texas next week, who they get at home, they will be in the SEC championship game against Georgia with the potential for an auto bid to the college football playoff. For Auburn, this win was massive to take down a top 15 team, to get some life back in the program. It kept them alive for bowl eligibility too. Now they'll have to beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa to get to a bowl, but if the Tide plays anything like they did on Saturday, that might not be super far-fetched. Number 21 Arizona State outlasted number 14 BYU 28-23 despite the absolute chaos that occurred in Tempe on Saturday afternoon. I mentioned in the preview episode last week when talking about this game that the biggest key to the matchup would be if BYU could contain Cam Skattebo and how he averaged 169 total yards per game coming into Saturday. Well, they in fact did not contain him, as he had 159 total yards, averaged 5.3 yards per carry, and scored 3 touchdowns. He's been the difference maker for them all year long, and he showed up when the lights were brightest against number 14 BYU. Despite the two trajectories that these teams have been on over the past couple weeks, BYU losing back-to-back games and Arizona State winning back-to-back games over ranked opponents, the teams are technically still tied for first, along with 2 other teams in the Big 12. Yes, there is a 4-way tie for first place in the Big 12 right now, and there are 8 teams that still technically have a path to the Big 12 championship. I'm sure a lot of people were probably under the impression that Saturday was an elimination game for the Cougars, but they literally just need to win their game against Houston, and then if Kansas State beats Iowa State, which is just a 2.5-point spread right now, BYU will be in the Big 12 championship. I also wanted to mention the chaos at the end of the game. If you missed the game, you probably saw it on social media, but it seems like every single fan base in college football just collectively forgot how to storm a field over the last couple weeks. Arizona State students went out too early. There was a huge effort to get everyone back onto the sideline, some people back up into the stands so they could actually run the final play, which was the BYU Hail Mary attempt that came up just short. But Oklahoma rushed too early against Alabama too, and then I want to say like 1 or 2 teams last week and the week before also went out on the field too early. And this was just something that like never happened and is now almost common. And in Arizona State's defense, it really did look like the game was over. The pass landed out of bounds like with 1 second left. You could hardly even really see the ball, but after reviewing it, it was pretty clear that there was 1 second. But Oklahoma's wasn't even close though. There were fans out on the field with like 28 seconds left. They had to get everybody back to the sideline on that one, and yeah, it was just wild. But Arizona State gets the win. Their fans get to storm the field twice, and just a massive moment for the program. The job that Kenny Dillingham has done this year is unbelievable. This was a 3-9 team in the Pac-12 last year. They changed conferences. They're going to all new places. They're playing all new teams, and they're now 9-2 and are in firm position to make the Big 12 championship in their first year in the conference and are a college football playoff contender. Keeping it in the Big 12, the conference is just ridiculous right now. It was a main talking point during all the realignment stuff over the summer and 2 years ago, but when the Big 12's group of teams was first put together with all the Pac-12 additions, there was a collective sense of this is a very even, very balanced, very intriguing group of teams, and this 2024 season has shown just that. Don't get me wrong, the realignment was stupid and never should have happened, but at least the results of the first season have been incredibly entertaining. Kansas beat number 16 Colorado 37-21. They're not only beating ranked teams, but they're doing so by 16 points, almost by 3 possessions. And this is the version of KU that we thought we were going to get coming into the season. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I talked about it a lot last week, but Kansas' schedule has been brutal this year, and it took some time for that to become clear with the emergence of teams like Arizona State, Illinois, and UNLV, all teams they lost to early on who weren't really expected to be all that great. Those losses didn't look very good at the time. They actually looked pretty bad. But now Arizona State, Illinois, UNLV, they're all ranked. They've lost 5 games by 1 possession, and now it's all starting to click. The main reason for their success over the past month has been Devin Neal. He's a Jayhawk through and through. He's one of the best ever in that program, and he was a beast on Saturday afternoon. I'm going to save his stats for the end of the episode. He is a king of the week, so make sure to stick around to the end because he was unreal. Similar to BYU, this loss on Saturday hasn't eliminated Colorado from the Big 12 title or college football playoff conversations either. Their path is a slim one, but it does still exist. Their biggest hurdle is that they basically need Houston to beat BYU. And that's not exactly out of the realm of possibility, to be honest. Houston did beat Kansas State earlier in the year, and BYU is known, of course, for their close calls. So it's not exactly the most likely outcome, but it is still possible. The win for Kansas here was incredible. They became the first team in college football history to beat 3 consecutive ranked opponents while having a losing record. The only team ever to do what they just did over the past 3 weeks. And to make it even crazier, they were extremely close to beating Kansas State as well, who at the time of the game was also ranked. They lost by 2 points. So they are a hair shy of having 4 consecutive ranked wins. Number 2 Ohio State blew out number 5 Indiana 38-15 in Columbus on Saturday, and the Hoosiers' undefeated season has come to an end. Indiana just had several self-inflicted mistakes and errors that contributed to the margin being what it was, but Ohio State also was dominant for the majority of this game. Indiana let Ohio State convert a 4th and 10 after a 3rd and 35 early on. It was 3rd and 35. They had a 25-yard pass and then a 15-yard pass to convert on 4th down. They just refused to cover Carnell Tate on back-to-back plays. That led to the Buckeyes' first touchdown. They had a snap go through their punter's hands right before the end of the half. That gave Ohio State a free touchdown to go up 14-7. Their special teams overall was really rough. They had the muff punt, of course, and then also on a punt, Caleb Downs had that phenomenal return for a touchdown that really flipped everything Ohio State's way for the rest of the game. Indiana left Emeka Egbuka wide open on 4th and 1 in the fourth quarter to also keep a drive alive for the Buckeyes that ended in a field goal. The opportunities were there to make this a competitive game for Indiana, but they just missed on every single one of them. Both teams are now 10 and 1. Technically both still alive for the Big Ten championship, but Ohio State just needs to beat Michigan next week to clinch their spot against Oregon. Indiana's ranking tonight will be very interesting to see because with the rest of the chaos that ensued around the country after Indiana lost to Ohio State, a lot of the teams that they were probably going to fall behind are no longer there to jump them. So Indiana's CFP chances are likely still pretty high. Number 6 Notre Dame obliterated number 19 Army 49-14. Again, just doing un-American things to the troops like they did to Navy. But ever since that loss to Northern Illinois, the Irish have been insane. Riley Leonard was extremely efficient. He was 10 of 13 passing for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 30 yards rushing, and then running back Jeremiah Love was impressive as well. He had 7 carries for 130 yards. That's 18.6 yards per carry and 2 touchdowns. Army's undefeated season has been ruined. They fall to 9-1. And the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame improved to 10-1, and they have a CFP deciding matchup on the road at USC next week. With the losses by Indiana and Army, the final remaining unbeaten team in the 2024 college football season is the Oregon Ducks. They are 11-0. They just barely survived their last game against Wisconsin by 3, but they did all they needed to do and won. They snuck by Boise State by 3. They even had the close call with Idaho in week 1. But they just kept finding ways to win, and they are the last unbeaten team standing in 2024. Speaking of finding ways to win close games, number 4 Penn State snuck out a close one on the road at Minnesota, as close as it gets, 26-25 over the Gophers. This game was extremely even. Minnesota had opportunities to get it done. They were actually given a 63.4% chance to win the game in the middle of the third quarter, but came up just short. They had a bad fumble right at the start of the fourth quarter, which swung all the momentum back Penn State's way. And in a game of inches, they made one more mistake, and Penn State made one more play to earn the win. With the victory, Penn State has pretty much locked up a CFP spot. They are 10-1, ranked number 4, and 24-point favorites over Maryland next week to end the regular season. One team that didn't have a super notable game this week, but who also saw their college football playoff chances increase greatly, was Clemson. The Tigers beat their FCS opponent, the Citadel, 51-14, but results of other games around the country were just as significant for them as getting their win. Clemson came into the week ranked number 17, and I made a post on Twitter and Instagram on Friday describing the scenario where they could get into the college football playoff as an at-large bid, and how the teams all ranked right ahead of them had pretty high chances to lose. So Clemson was number 17, and number 16 Colorado, number 15 Texas A&M, and number 14 BYU all lost. And then number 9 Ole Miss and number 7 Alabama did as well. So in 1 week, they have a serious chance to jump 5 spots from number 17 to number 12 and be right on the edge of the CFP field. I've mentioned this scenario a couple times outside of those Twitter and Instagram posts, but they've had this path existing for several weeks. And should they beat a top 20 South Carolina team this week, who they get at home and opened on Sunday as a 3-point favorite over, they'd be looking really good to grab one of those last couple seeds. Some other notable results from the week. Georgia Tech beat NC State on Thursday night in one of the most back-and-forth finishes to a game all year. The win improved their record to 7-4, and with their wins over top 10 Miami and 8-3 Duke, as well as the fact that 2 of their losses came while Haynes King was out, Georgia Tech could be in contention to be ranked tonight. Number 13 SMU dominated Virginia 33-7, and in their first season in the ACC, the Mustangs are currently 7-0 in conference play and have already locked up a spot in Charlotte in the ACC championship game. They're another team, along with Clemson and Miami. The entire ACC really benefited greatly from a lot of the upsets this week, because should they lose the ACC title game, they have a significantly higher chance now of staying in the top 12 and getting an at-large bid. Oregon State beat Washington State 41-38 in a thrilling Pac-12 championship game. The Beavers secure their spot at the top of the conference this year on a 55-yard field goal in the final seconds. The fans stormed the field, and it was just an awesome scene in Corvallis on Saturday night. For the first time since 2012, Nebraska beat Wisconsin, and they did so in dominant fashion. The Huskers beat the Badgers 44-25 to snap their 10-game losing streak to Wisconsin. And this win also got them to 6 wins. They are bowl eligible for the first time since 2016. And last, and to be honest, you could probably say least, Florida State put the smackdown on Charleston Southern. The Seminoles smoked the Buccaneers 41-7 to earn their second win of the season. They are now 2-9. And in what has just been an unthinkable year in Tallahassee, you got to take the wins that you can get. And now they have to host the red-hot Florida Gators next week. All right, now it's time for Kings of the Week, a segment where I highlight some of the best performances across the country each and every week. First up, we have Kansas running back Devin Neal. Neal was an absolute monster in the Jayhawks' victory over number 16 Colorado. He put the team on his back 37 carries for 207 yards, 5.6 yards per carry, and 3 touchdowns. But that wasn't enough for him because he also led the team in receiving, 4 receptions for 80 yards and another touchdown there as well. He touched the ball 41 times in this game, accounting for 287 total yards. That is an average of a 7-yard gain every single time they involved Devin Neal in a play, and he was a part of 41 of them. 287 total yards, 4 total touchdowns, and he led Kansas to yet another ranked win. We also have Auburn running back Jarquez Hunter. In similar fashion, he put the team on his back at certain points throughout the game against number 15 Texas A&M. He had 28 carries for 130 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then also had 4 receptions for 23 yards. So 153 total yards, 3 touchdowns, and helped the Tigers earn a program trajectory-altering win over the Aggies. Then Texas Tech quarterback Baron Morton. This was one of the most underrated games from Week 13. With all the upsets and stuff, it got kind of overshadowed. But in a 56-48 victory over Oklahoma State, Morton went 35 of 50, that's 70%, for 366 yards and 4 touchdowns. Morton's been in the top 15 in passing yards per game for basically the entire season, and that showed up again last week. And lastly, we have Syracuse quarterback Kyle McCord against 7-3 UConn on Saturday. McCord went 37 of 47, that's 78.7%, for 470 yards and 3 total touchdowns. 470. The Syracuse Orange are now 8-3 on the year, most wins in a season since 2018, and that's largely in part due to McCord slinging it all over the field this season, especially on Saturday against UConn. That's going to wrap up this episode of the CFBKings Show. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. Thank you for especially making it all the way to the end of this one and bearing with my voice. But I can't believe we only have 1 week left of the regular season, but rivalry week is going to be amazing. I also wanted to quickly let you know that there won't be a Week 14 preview episode for rivalry week slate, unfortunately. Just with everything going on with Thanksgiving, I won't have enough time to produce a full podcast episode, so make sure you're following at CFBKings on Twitter and Instagram because there'll be a lot of content over there. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, follow if you're listening on Spotify, and definitely go check out at CFBKings on Twitter and Instagram for all things college football. Thank you so much for watching, have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.